What if your last breath, lost in a Wyoming blizzard, was heard by a stranger who carried the weight of his own ghosts? In the brutal winter of 1878, on the unforgiving plains where hope freezes faster than blood, a woman's faint whisper sparked a story that would burn brighter than any fire. This is the tale of Mara Linden, a mother left to die, and Elias Kane, the cowboy who stopped to listen when the world turned its back. Hold on tight. This is a journey through snow, sorrow, and second chances that'll grip your heart and not let go. The Wyoming plains stretched endless under a sky choked with snow. The kind of storm that didn't just fall, it hunted. Mara Linden staggered through the drifts, her bare feet numb, each step a battle against the ice that clawed at her skin. Her shawl, once a soft green, now hung in tatters, flapping uselessly against the wind. Her arms wrapped tight around her chest, not for warmth but to hold in the fading ember of hope that flickered with every heartbeat. In her right hand, she clutched a leather pouch, its frayed strap cutting into her shoulder. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been, as if it carried the weight of her entire world. She whispered a name into the gale, soft and broken. Lila. Her vision blurred, the world tilting as her strength gave way. She collapsed against a twisted pine, its bark sharp against her frost-bitten fingers. The cold wasn't just outside anymore, it had burrowed deep, wrapping her bones in a chill that whispered surrender. Mara had been running for days, maybe weeks, from a man who'd stolen everything, her home, her trust, and worst of all, her 2-year-old daughter. Her lips, cracked and blue, trembled as she tried to speak again, but the wind swallowed her voice. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the snow, her body curling inward like a leaf folding against the frost. This, she thought, was where her story would end, alone, forgotten, with only the storm to mourn her. But then, through the howl of the blizzard, came a sound, the steady crunch of hooves, deliberate, unyielding. Mara forced her eyes open, squinting. Into the white, a shadow emerged, tall and solid, a horse, its breath steaming like dragon's fire, and atop it, a man, his silhouette cut through the storm. Broad shoulders draped in a wool coat dusted with snow. A wide-brimmed hat pulled low over eyes that seemed to pierce the veil of the blizzard. He was Elias Kane, a drifter known to the Cheyenne as Ta'a, one who walks alone. His face was carved by the years, not old but weathered, with dark eyes that held stories he'd buried long ago. Scars traced his jaw, faint but telling, and his hands, calloused from rope and rain, moved with a quiet certainty. Elias dismounted, his boots sinking into the snow as he approached. He knelt beside her, his breath fogging the air between them. No words, just a silence that felt like a question. Mara's dress was shredded, a gash across her arm weeping red into the frost, her skin pale as moonlight. Her right wrist was swollen, bruised purple, and her fingers clung to the leather pouch like it was her last tie to the living. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the kind that didn't beg but demanded to be seen. "Are you real?" Mara croaked, her voice barely a thread, frayed by cold and fear. Elias's gaze softened, but he didn't answer. Instead, he unfastened a blanket from his saddle, a thick weave of wool and bison hide, warm from the horse's heat, and draped it over her trembling frame. Her body shuddered as the warmth touched her, a small rebellion against the cold that had nearly claimed her. Without a word, he lifted her, light as a fallen bird, and set her in front of him on the horse. The mare, a sturdy bay named Juniper, snorted softly, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Elias pressed Mara against his chest, his arms steady around her, sharing his heat as the storm screamed on. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low, like gravel smoothed by a river's current. Mara tried to speak, her throat raw and tight. Her lips brushed his ear, and the words came, faint but sharp. "My daughter. He stole her. Amos Creed." The name hit Elias like a blade. His jaw tightened, but he kept his silence, letting the wind carry her words away. Amos Creed, a name he didn't know, but would never forget. He turned Juniper not toward the nearest settlement, where lanterns flickered weakly against the storm, but north to a place he'd sworn never to return. A trapper's shack hidden in a grove of aspen, tucked against a ridge where the wind couldn't reach. There was a place his father had shown him years ago, a sanctuary for those who needed to disappear. The storm raged, but Mara's world quieted, held by the rhythm of hooves, and the stranger who'd chosen to stop when the world had not. Inside the shack, Elias laid her on a pallet of furs, near a blackened stone hearth. The air smelled of pine and old smoke, the walls sturdy but worn, whispering of forgotten winters. He struck flint, coaxing a fire to life. its glow dancing across the rough-hewn beams. Mara's breath came shallow, her chest rising and falling, like a candle flame fighting to stay lit. Her fingers still gripped the pouch, knuckles white despite her weakness. Elias melted snow in a dented tin cup, holding it to her lips. She drank, coughing, her eyes flickering with a mix of fear and something new trust. Fragile as the first thaw. "What's in there?" he asked, nodding at the pouch, his voice gentle but curious. Mara's hand tightened, protective, her nails digging into the leather. "Everything I have left," she whispered, her voice breaking like thin ice. He didn't press. Instead, he sat back, his rifle across his lap, watching the flames as if they might speak. The storm outside howled, rattling the door, but inside, a fragile warmth grew not just from the fire, but from the unspoken promise that he wouldn't let her face the dark alone. Hours passed, the night deepening, the shack, a small island. In the sea of snow, Mara stirred, her voice a rasp against the crackle of the fire. He said he'd sell her to pay my debt. Her eyes met his, wild with pain, glistening with tears she hadn't yet shed. "She's only 2. Elias leaned forward, his shadow falling over her, his eyes steady as stone. "No one sells a child while I'm breathing," he said, the words not a vow but a fact, solid as the earth beneath them. Mara's lips parted, but no sound came. She sank back, exhaustion pulling her under, but her grip on the pouch never loosened. Elias stayed awake, his gaze fixed on the door, as if Amos Creed might storm through it at any moment. The firelight flickered, catching the edge of the pouch as it slipped slightly from Mara's grasp. Inside, Elias glimpsed a flash of blue fabrica, a tiny dress, stained with dirt and time, folded with care. What had Mara carried through that storm? And what kind of man could tear a mother from her child? Elias didn't know yet, but the plains had a way of revealing truths. And when they did, he'd be ready to carve justice from the snow itself. What secrets does Mara's pouch hold? And will Elias find the child before Amos Creed's shadow swallows them all? The fire in the trapper's shack crackled, its warmth battling the chill that seeped through the aspen walls. Mara Linden lay on the fur pallet, her breathing shallow but steady. Her fingers still curled around the leather pouch, like it was her last tether to the world. The storm outside raged on, rattling the door, but inside, time seemed to pause, held in the quiet space between survival and surrender. Elias Kane sat by the hearth, his dark eyes fixed on the flames, his rifle resting across his knees. He hadn't slept, hadn't moved, except to add wood to the fire or check the tin cup of melted snow at Mara's side. Her words from the night before he stole her, Amos Creed, echoed in his mind, sharp as a spur, digging into his thoughts. Mara stirred, her eyelids fluttering like moth wings. The fever that had gripped her was loosening, but her face was still pale, her lips cracked like dry riverbed. She tried to sit, her body trembling with the effort, but Elias was at her side in an instant, his hand, gentle but firm, on her shoulder. "Easy," he said, his voice low, steady, like a rope tossed to a drowning soul. "You're not strong enough yet." "I have to be," Mara whispered, her voice hoarse but fierce. "Lila, she's out there." Her eyes, green as sagebrush after rain, locked onto his, pleading not for pity but for purpose. "She's all I have." Elias nodded, his jaw tight. He didn't make promises lightly, too many had been broken in his own life. But something in Mara's voice stirred a fire in him, one he thought had gone cold years ago. "Tell me about her," he said, settling back, giving her space to breathe, to speak. Mara's gaze drifted to the fire, her fingers tracing the edge of the pouch. "Lila's too. Curls like her father's, eyes like mine. She laughs like a bell, even when there's nothing to laugh about." Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. "We were headed west, to Oregon, for a fresh start. My husband, he died in a logging camp, crushed under a fallen pine. Left me with nothing but debts and Lila. Amos Creed offered us passage, said he had a wagon, a way out. I trusted him." She laughed, bitter and hollow. "He waited till we were halfway across Wyoming, then demanded payment I couldn't give. Said Lila would fetch a price in Denver, to a family with money. When I fought him, he beat me, tied me to a post, and took her. Left me in the snow to die." Elias's hands clenched, the knuckles whitening. He'd seen men like Amos Creed before, vultures in human skin, preying on the desperate. His own sister had fallen to a man like that, years back, and the memory burned like a brand. "Where was he headed?" he asked, his voice calm, but edged with steel. "South," Mara said, her eyes searching his face. He mentioned a trading post near Laramie, said he had connections there. She reached into the pouch, her movements slow, deliberate, and pulled out the blue dress Elias had glimpsed before. It was small, hand-stitched, with tiny embroidered daisies along the hem. "This was hers," she said, her voice breaking. "I made it for her first birthday. It's all I could keep when he tore her from me." Elias looked at the dress, then at Mara. The firelight caught the tears in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. He stood, crossing to the shack's single window, where frost framed the glass like lace. The storm was easing, the snow falling softer now, but the world outside was still a frozen maze. He turned back to her. "You rest. I'll find her." Mara's head snapped up. "You don't even know me. Why would you do this?" Elias paused, his hand on the doorframe. For a moment, he saw his sister's face, her smile fading in a dusty saloon, where he'd been too late to save her. "Because no one should lose what you've lost," he said simply. "And because I heard you when you thought no one would." Her breath caught, and for the first time, a flicker of hope crossed her face, fragile but real. She nodded, clutching the dress tighter. "Her name's Leela," she said again, as if saying it might keep her daughter alive. Elias stepped outside, the cold biting his face as he checked Juniper's saddle. The mare snorted, ready despite the storm's lingering threat. He scanned the horizon, where the ridge met the sky, and spotted a faint trail hoofprints, half buried, leading south, through the snow. Amos Creed wasn't clever enough to cover his tracks, not in this weather. Elias's fingers brushed the knife at his belt, its bone handle worn smooth from years of use. He wasn't a killer, not by choice, but he'd do what needed doing. Back inside, he packed a small bundle jerky, a flint, a spare blanket and slung it over his shoulder. Mara watched him, her eyes sharper now, fighting the fever's pull. "If you find her," she said, her voice steady despite the strain, "tell her mama's waiting. Tell her I'm coming." "I will," Elias said, meeting her gaze. "But you're gonna tell her yourself when I bring her back." He stepped into the snow, the door creaking shut behind him. The wind carried a low moan, like the plains themselves were grieving. Elias mounted Juniper, his eyes fixed on the faint trail south. Amos Creed was out there, with a child who didn't belong to him, and Elias Kane was coming not for vengeance, but for a promise he hadn't spoken but felt in his bones. Will Elias's trail lead to Lila, or will Amos Creed's shadow prove darker than the storm itself? The Wyoming dawn broke cold and gray. The storm's fury softened to a restless drift of snow. Elias Kane rode south, Juniper's hoofs carving a path through the fresh powder, following the faint trail of hoofprints that Amos Creed had left behind. The plains stretched wide, a sea of white broken only by jagged ridges and skeletal pines. Elias's breath clouded the air, his eyes sharp, scanning every bent branch, every scuff in the snow. The leather pouch Mara had clung to weighed on his mind, its contents a child's dress, stitched with daisies burning like a beacon in his thoughts. Leela was out there, and so was the man who'd torn her from her mother's arms. Elias wasn't a stranger to tracking. He'd hunted elk through blizzards, followed wolf packs across frozen rivers. But this was different. This wasn't prey, it was a child, a life stolen. His hands tightened on the reins, the memory of Mara's broken whisper, "She's only 2, driving him forward. He'd promised to bring Lila back, and Elias Kane didn't break promises. Not since the day he'd failed his sister, leaving her to a fate he couldn't undo. That guilt rode with him now, heavy as the rifle slung across his back. The trail led him through a narrow pass, where the wind carved eerie moans from the rocks. The hoofprints grew fresher, joined by the shallow ruts of a wagon's wheels, half buried but unmistakable. Amos hadn't bothered to hide his path, or stupidity, Elias couldn't tell. He dismounted, crouching to study the tracks. A scrap of cloth caught his eye, tangled in a thorn bush, a tiny mitten, blue like the dress, its edges frayed but soft, as if it had been held close. Elias tucked it into his coat, his chest tightening. Lila was alive. She had to be. He pressed on, the day stretching long and cold. By midday, he reached a frozen creek, its surface cracked like a broken mirror. There, in the mud at the bank, he found a campfire's remains, ashes still warm, a tin plate abandoned beside it. Amos had stopped here, maybe hours ago. Elias's gaze swept the horizon, landing on a faint curl of smoke, rising from a copse of cottonwoods a mile off. His pulse quickened. He urged Juniper forward, moving low and quiet. The mare, sensing his tension, the cottonwoods hit a clearing, and in it, A wagon, its canvas torn, one wheel sunk in the snow. Elias tied Juniper to a tree and crept closer, his boots silent on the frozen ground. A fire burned low, its embers spitting. A man sat beside it, broad-shouldered, his beard tangled and greasy. A bottle in one hand, a rifle in the other. Amos Creed. His coat was patched, his eyes bloodshot, darting nervously, as if the trees themselves were watching. Elias's gaze moved past him, to a bundle of furs tucked in the wagon's shadow. A soft whimper broke the silence. Small but piercing. Elias's hand went to his knife, but he stayed still, waiting. Amos stood, swaying, and stumbled toward the wagon. "Quiet, girl," he slurred, kicking at the bundle. The whimper stopped, replaced by a muffled sob. Elias's blood ran hot, but he held back. Rushing in could cost Leela her life. He needed a plan, a moment when Amos's guard was down. The day faded to dusk, the sky bruising purple. Elias waited, hidden in the trees, his breath slow and deliberate. Amos drank more, his movements sluggish, his rifle now propped against the wagon. When the man finally slumped by the fire, snoring loudly, Elias moved. He slipped into the clearing, silent as a shadow, and knelt by the bundle. Leela lay curled in the furs, her face pale, her curls matted with dirt. Her tiny hands clutched a rag doll, its button eyes staring blankly. She stirred, her eyes meeting his, wide and frightened but alive. "It's okay, little one," Elias whispered, his voice soft as a prayer. "Your mama sent me." Leela's lips trembled, but she didn't cry. Elias lifted her, furs and all, and backed away, his eyes never leaving Amos. The man stirred, muttering, but didn't wake. Elias reached Juniper, securing Leela against his chest, her small body warm but fragile. He mounted and turned north, the trail to the shack clear in his mind. But as he rode, a crack split, the arrow rifle shot, grazing the tree beside him. Amos was awake, staggering, his weapon raised. "You thieving dog," Amos roared, fumbling to reload. "She's mine to sell." Elias didn't look back. He spurred Juniper into a gallop, Leela's weight anchoring him as the mare surged through the snow. Another shot rang out, but it went wide, lost in the wind. The cottonwood swallowed them, and Elias rode hard, his heart pounding not with fear but with purpose. Leela clung to him, her face buried in his coat, and for the first time in years, Elias felt something shift inside him, a spark of redemption, fragile but growing. The shack was still hours away, but every mile brought Mara closer to her daughter. Elias whispered to Leela, his voice steady despite the chase. "Hold tight, darlin'. We're going home." Will Elias outrun Amos Creed's wrath, or will the shadow of the past catch up before Mara sees her daughter again? The Wyoming night was a living thing, its cold claws raking through the pines as Elias Kane rode north. Leela cradled against his chest. Juniper's hooves pounded the snow, each stride a defiance against the rifle shots that had chased them from Amos Creed's camp. The little girl clung to Elias, her tiny hands fisted in his coat, her face buried against the rough wool. Her rag doll, with its button eyes, dangled from her grip, swaying with the mare's gallop. Elias kept his eyes forward, the trail to the trapper's shack etched in his memory, but his senses stayed sharp, listening for the crack of a twig or the distant thud of pursuit. Amos Creed wasn't the kind to give up easy, not when he thought something was his to claim. The sky was a bruise of purple and black, stars hidden by clouds heavy with more snow. Elias whispered to Leela, his voice a low hum over the wind. "You're safe now, darlin'. Mama's waiting." Leela didn't answer, but her small body relaxed slightly, her breath warm against his neck. He adjusted the bison blanket around her, shielding her from the cold. The mitten he'd found by the creek was tucked in his pocket, a reminder of how close he'd come to losing her trail. He wouldn't let Amos steal her again. Back at the shack, Mara Linden sat by the fire, her hands trembling as she clutched the blue dress with its daisy-stitched hem. The fever had broken, leaving her weak but clear-eyed, her strength fueled by a mother's desperation. She'd forced herself to stand, pacing the small space, her bare feet brushing the pine needle floor. The leather pouch lay open beside her, its contents spilling secrets. The dress, a locket with a curl of Leela's hair, and a crumpled letter from her late husband. Its ink faded, but its words still sharp with love. She traced the letter's edges, her lips moving silently. "We'll make a home, Mara. You and me and our girl." That dream had died with him, but Leela was still out there, and Mara would fight the devil himself to hold her again. The fire popped startling her. She turned to the door, her heart lurching at every gust of wind. Elias had been gone to long hours, maybe a day. Doubt crept in, cold as the snow outside. What if Amos had found him? What if Lila was already gone, sold to strangers in some far-off town? She shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. Elias had looked at her with eyes that didn't lie, eyes that carried their own scars. He'd promised to bring Lila back, and she believed him not because she wanted to, but because she had to. A sound broke through the storm's low moan hooves, steady and fast. Mara froze, her breath catching. She stumbled to the door, flinging it open, the cold rushing in like a slap. Through the snow, a shadow emerged. Elias, his hat dusted white, Juniper's flanks steaming, and there, in his arms, a bundle of furs that stirred with life. Mara's knees buckled, but she caught herself, running barefoot into the snow, heedless of the pain in her ribs. "Lila," she cried, her voice raw, breaking the night. Elias dismounted, his movements careful as he lowered the bundle to her. Mara's hands shook as she pulled back the furs, revealing Lila's face pale, dirt-streaked, but alive. The girl's green eyes blinked up at her, slow and uncertain, then widened with recognition. "Mama," she whispered, her voice small, but clear, a bell ringing through the storm. Mara sobbed, pulling Lila close, her lips pressing against her daughter's forehead. "Oh, my girl, she murmured, rocking her as tears froze on her cheeks. Lila's arms wrapped around her neck, the rag doll pressed between them. Mara looked up at Elias, her eyes shining with gratitude too deep for words. "You brought her back," she said, her voice trembling. "You kept your word." Elias nodded, stepping back, giving them space. "She's yours," he said simply, his voice rough with something unspoken. He turned to Juniper, checking the mare's saddle, but his eyes lingered on Mara and Lila, the firelight from the shack framing them like a painting dot inside. Mara sat by the hearth, Lila curled in her lap, the blue dress draped over them both. She hummed a lullaby, soft and halting, one her mother had sung back in Missouri when the world was kinder. Elias added wood to the fire, his movements quiet, deliberate. He glanced at the pouch, now open, and saw the locket glinting in the light. "Your husband?" he asked, nodding toward it. Mara's fingers brushed the locket, her expression softening. "Thomas," she said. "He was a good man. Dreamed of a homestead where Lila could run free." Her voice hardened. "Amos took that dream. Said I owed him for the wagon, for the food. Said Lila was payment." Elias's jaw clenched, his hand resting on his knife. "He won't come near her again," he said. The words a quiet vow. Looked at him, searching his face. "You don't know Amos. He's not just greedy, he's cruel. He'll come back, Elias. Men like him always do." "Then I'll be ready," Elias said, his eyes meeting hers, steady as the ridge outside. "You're not alone anymore." The words hung between them, simple but heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. Mara's breath caught, not from fear but from the weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. She tightened, her arms around Lila, who slept now, her tiny chest rising and falling. The shack felt warmer, not just from the fire, but from the fragile bond forming in its glow. Bond forged in snow and promises kept. But outside, the wind carried a new sound, a distant crack. Not thunder, but something human, deliberate. Elias' head snapped toward the door, his hand on his rifle. The night wasn't done with them yet, and Amos Creed's shadow loomed closer than they knew. Can Mara and Elias protect Lila from Amos's vengeance? Or will the storm bring a danger they can't outrun? The trapper's shack stood like a sentinel in the Wyoming dawn, its aspen walls bathed in the pale light of a sun struggling to pierce the clouds. Inside, Mara Linden held Lila close, the girl's soft breaths a rhythm against her chest. The fire had dwindled to embers, but the warmth in the room came from more than wood. It came from the fragile new family forged in the storm's shadow. Elias Kane stood by the door, his rifle in hand, his eyes scanning the snow-dusted ridge through the shack's narrow window. The crack they'd heard last night, a twig snapped under a boot. Too deliberate to be the windhead, kept him awake, his senses taut as a bowstring. Amos Creed was out there, and he wasn't done. Mara's gaze flicked to Elias, reading the tension in his shoulders. She'd seen that look before, in her husband Thomas's eyes, when creditors came knocking. But Elias's carried something deeper, quiet resolve. Like a man who'd faced darkness, and walked away scarred but unbroken. "He's coming, isn't he?" she asked, her voice low to keep Lila asleep. Elias nodded, not turning from the window. He's close. Tracks circled the shack at midnight. One man, heavy boots, moving slow. His fingers brushed the knife at his belt, its bone handle gleaming faintly. He's watching, waiting for a mistake. Mara's arms tightened around Lila, the blue dress with its daisy hem draped over the girl's small frame. What does he want? He already took everything. Not everything, Elias said, his eyes meeting hers. He wants you afraid, wants you to believe you're still his, to break. He stepped closer, his voice softening. But you're not that woman anymore, Mara. You survived him. You survived the storm. Her breath caught, his words striking a chord she hadn't known was there. She wasn't just a widow or a victim. She was a mother, a fighter, and for the first time, she felt seen not for her pain, but for her strength. She stood, careful not to wake Lila, and moved to the hearth, where the locket and letter lay beside her pouch. Thomas used to say, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's what you do with it," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not running, Elias. Not again." He studied her, a flicker of pride in his dark eyes. "Good," he said. "Because I'm done running, too." The morning passed in quiet preparation. Elias reinforced the door with an old iron bar, checked his rifles, cartridges, and sharpened his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Mara, her ribs still sore but her spirit unyielding, wrapped Lila in a sling of soft hides, tying it across her chest so she could move if needed. She took the letter from Thomas, folding it into her pocket, a reminder of the love that had brought her here, and the love she'd fight to keep. Together, they worked in silence, their movements a dance of trust, each glance a wordless promise. By noon, the air grew heavy, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm or a fight. Elias stepped outside, his boots crunching on the snow, and scanned the ridge. The tracks were fresher now, circling closer, joined by a faint drag mark, a rope, maybe, or a sack. Amos wasn't alone anymore. Elias's gut twisted. He'd faced men like Amos before, but the thought of Mara and Lila caught in the crossfire sharpened his focus to a razor's edge. Back inside, he told Mara, he's got help. At least one other, maybe two. They're planning something. He hesitated, then added, if it comes to it, there's a path behind the shack, through the aspens. Leads to a creek. Follow it north, if I don't come back. Mara's eyes flashed. You're coming back, Elias. We're in this together. He held her gaze, the weight of her words settling over him like a warm blanket. For years, he'd ridden alone, carrying his sister's ghost and the guilt of not saving her. But now, with Mara's fierce green eyes and Lila's soft snores filling the shack, he felt anchored, needed. Together, he agreed, the word feeling like a vow. As dusk fell, the attack came. A shout split the air, followed by the crack of a rifle. The window shattered, glass spraying across the floor. Mara dropped low, shielding Lila, who woke with a cry. Elias returned fire through the broken window, his shots precise, forcing the shadows outside to scatter. Stay down, he called, his voice calm but commanding. Mara crawled to the corner, clutching Lila, her heart pounding. She whispered to her daughter, it's okay, baby. Mama's here. But her eyes were on Elias, his silhouette steady, against the firelight, a lone figure holding the line. Another shot rang out, splintering the doorframe, and a voice of messes slurred but venomous cut through the chaos. You can't keep what's mine, woman. Hand over the girl, or I burn this place down. Mara's blood ran cold, but she stood, her voice ringing out, clear and unafraid. You'll never touch her again, Amos. You hear me? She's mine. Her defiance echoed, a mother's love, turned to steel. Elias glanced back, a faint smile tugging at his lips. That's my girl, he murmured, then fired another shot, the sound swallowed by a sudden howl of wind. The attackers fell silent, but the tension hung thick. The night, holding its breath, Elias reloaded, his movements swift, and whispered to Mara, he's rattled, that's good. Means he's scared. But as the stars began to pierce the sky, a new sound emerged, a low crackle, not from gunfire, but from fire. Smoke curled under the door, sharp and acrid. Amos had made good on his threat. The shack was burning, and time was running out. Will Elias and Mara escape the flames with Lila, or will Amos Creed's cruelty consume their fragile hope? Smoke curled through the trapper's shack, thick and choking, as flames licked the walls, their roar drowning out the Wyoming wind. Mara Linden clutched Lila, the girl's small body trembling in the hide, sling against her chest. Elias Kane stood at the door, rifle in hand, his silhouette framed by the fire's glow. The shack was burning. Amos Creed's final act of cruelty, turning their sanctuary into a trap. Outside, his voice echoed, slurred but triumphant. "You can't hide forever, Mara. Give me the girl, and I'll let you walk." Mara's eyes blazed, her fears swallowed by a mother's fury. "Over my dead body," she whispered, her voice steel. She looked at Elias, who met her gaze with a nod, his calm a lifeline in the chaos. "The crick path," he said, low and urgent. Now, he kicked open the door, firing a shot into the dark, to scatter Amos and his men. The cold air rushed in, mixing with smoke as Mara ducked low. Lila pressed tight against her. Elias led the way, his knife drawn, guiding them through the aspens behind the shack. Flames roared behind them, the shack collapsing in a shower of sparks. But the path to the creek was clear, its icy water glinting under the starlight. They ran, Mara's bare feet stinging on the frozen ground, Elias's hand steady on her arm, urging her forward. The creek twisted north, its banks lined with willows that hid their flight. Amos's shouts faded, swallowed by the wind. But Elias didn't slow. "He'll follow," he said, his voice grim. "But not where we're going." He led them deeper into the wilderness, to a place he'd only spoken of in whispers, a hidden hollow, nestled beyond a ridge where the elk roamed and the white man's maps ended. It was called SP in the Cheyenne tongue, the place of quiet waters, a sanctuary his father had shown him long ago. Dawn broke as they reached the hollow, a crescent of earth cradling a stone cabin, its chimney blackened but sturdy, its walls woven with reeds to keep out the cold. Elias pushed open the door, revealing a single room smelling of cedar and thyme. Mara stepped inside, Lila stirring in her arms, and felt the air shifted, not warmer, but right, like the world had finally aligned. She set Lila down, the girl toddling across the pine needle floor, her rag doll trailing behind. "This is home," Mara whispered, the words a prayer and a promise. Elias stoked a fire, his movements quiet but purposeful. Mara watched him, her heart full yet heavy. "Why here?" she asked, her voice soft. He looked around, his eyes tracing the walls. "My father said this place was for those who needed to start again. It's been empty since he passed, but it's waited for someone like you." His gaze met hers, steady and unguarded. "Someone who fights." Mara's throat tightened. She thought of Thomas, of the dreams they'd lost, but also of the strength she'd found in the snow, in Elias's shadow, in Lila's laughter. She reached into her pocket, pulling out Thomas's letter, its edges worn but intact. "I was running from a ghost," she said, her voice steady. "But you gave me something to run toward." Elias stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, a touch as gentle as the first thaw. "You were never running, Mara. You were building." Days turned to weeks in the hollow. Elias repaired the cabin's roof. Mara stitched curtains from rabbit hides, and Lila chased fireflies, her giggles echoing like a song. They planted a small garden, potatoes and herbs tucked against the ridge, each root acclaimed to the life they were forging. Neighbors came slowly, an old Cheyenne woman with baskets of dried berries, a trapper who nodded at Elias with quiet respect. Word spread, not of a widow or a drifter, but of a family who'd defied the storm and won. One evening, as the fire crackled and Lila slept between them, Mara asked, "What happens if Amos finds us?" Elias's eyes darkened, but his voice was calm. "He won't. I tracked his trail after the fire. He's gone headed south, probably to Denver. Men like him don't come back when they know they're beaten." He paused, then added, "But if he does, he'll find a wall he can't cross." Mara nodded, her fingers brushing the locket at her neck, now joined by a Cheyenne bead, woven by Elias's symbol of their shared path. "I used to pray for someone to save me," she said, her voice soft but sure. "But you didn't save me, Elias. You showed me I could save myself." He smiled, a rare warmth breaking through his stoic mask. "You were always stronger than you knew, Mara." Spring came, the hollow blooming with wildflowers, their colors mirroring the daisies on Lila's dress. Mara stood outside, watching Lila chase a butterfly, her laughter mingling with the stream's song. Elias joined her, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining like roots. "This is our place," he said, his voice low, final. "No one takes it from us." Mara leaned into him, her heart steady. "No one," she agreed. She looked at the horizon, where the ridge met the sky, and felt no fear, only peace, hard-won, an unshakable dot in the late 19th century. The American West was a place of both peril and promise. where women like Mara faced unimaginable hardships, betrayal, and the loss of children to illness or greed. Yet, it was also a land of resilience, where communities, often with the help of native peoples like the Cheyenne, built lives from the ashes of loss. Stories like Mara and Elias's remind us that strength isn't just in survival, in choosing to rebuild, to love, to trust again. Their tale echoes the spirit of the frontier, where hope could bloom even in the harshest winters. If Mara and Elias's journey touched your heart, hit that like button to let their story shine brighter. Subscribe and ring the bell to join us for more tales of courage and love from the Wild West. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even in the darkest storms, there's a light worth fighting for. Let's keep these stories alive. Together. The hollow is theirs. But what new challenges await Mara, Elias, and Lila, as the West calls them, to new horizons?